everyone, and welcome back. So today we're talking about Mare of Easttown episode 3, enter number 2. And honestly, this case is as disjointed as Mare is. And by the end of the episode, I kept thinking, is this case just like a means to an end? What are we supposed to anticipate for the second half of this season? And you know what? At the heart of this show, and I think that's what this episode made clear, is Mare's sort of inability to deal with her grief and how this will unravel. And this gets played out almost right away. So the episode starts with Mare kind of staring at her grandson. And I think I didn't realize her desperation until the end of the episode, but it seems like she has a lot of guilt from her son's suicide. And maybe she sees her son or her grandson as a way of kind of making up for lost time, kind of really undoing what she feels is bad parenting. And again, she hasn't really been able to deal with the grief, and there seems to be a lot of pent-up anger that's about to explode. Okay, so we'll take a look and then you guys can tell me what you think. So the episode starts off with Erin's autopsy, and it seems like whoever had killed her had moved her body, and so they're trying to figure out, you know, who the shooter was and what were the circumstances that kind of led her to the second point, where's her bicycle, all these questions. And we follow up with Dylan. Unfortunately, he's still alive and he's not paralyzed. And I have to tell you, like, the secondary characters in this are so painfully unlikable. Like, it's hard for me to like care even about who the person is. And we kind of get a flood of new suspects, right? So first we get Frank, which is Mare's ex-husband. Then we get this priest, and then we get this random kid who shows up. And you know, we'll talk about all these random suspects later, but let's start off with Frank. So I appreciated the directness right away. So Mare's friend comes over and she's like, yeah, so Erin's best friend told me that the father of her baby could possibly be your ex-husband Frank. And she just goes over there and she's like, okay, I'm gonna ask. So I like that this is just being addressed right away. And you know, she just goes over there, knocks on his door. She says, hey, you know, get your ass out here. We need to talk. And so they're having this conversation, and a few things kind of struck out at me. First, again, Mare's inability to deal with grief. So according to Frank, he befriended her because during this time, like, their son had committed suicide, and so he kind of projected a lot onto Erin, and he wanted to help her, so he bought her food and resources and all these things as a way just to help her. Like, it was an innocent kind of thing. And he kind of says, hey, like, at least I can talk about our son's grief. And it seems like everybody has a different way of dealing with grief, and they're not all dealing with it together. You know, like, you look at Siobhan, which is her daughter. She seems to be doing a documentary, and, you know, we get kind of home videos of who Mare's son is. And we're not sure if he died alone or what the circumstances were, but this is how she's dealing with her grief. And then you look at, you know, Frank, and it seems like he was going through a tough time. And one of the reasons they divorced is because they couldn't talk about it. And later on down the episode, actually, Lori, so Mare's friend, like, her husband kind of comes up to Mare and says, hey, your ex-husband had an alibi, like, here's a picture of him, kind of alluding to the point that you have no idea what this guy has gone through. So everybody seems to have their own, like, coping mechanisms, and Mare's is to work. It's to work. I don't know if you noticed, but this girl's always outside doing things, and she's very distracted, you know what I mean? And it seems like she's trying to fill her time so she doesn't have to think about this. And this doesn't even become clear until the end of the episode. So another thing to note about this conversation is Frank's wife. Like, I'm not sure if she's just supposed to be there or a background character, but she looked very concerned when she overheard the possibility that he could be the baby daddy. She just kind of had this look on her face, and I don't know if I was reading too much into that, or if she doesn't like Mare. Like, I don't know if they know each other or what the situation is, but that's something to be looked into. So Frank is no longer a suspect, and then we get to, like, the suspect of the week. So it seems like every episode has, like, a monster of the week, like a new suspect for us to think about and brainstorm, and it seems like increasingly this is becoming less and less important. So we get to the priest, and the most interesting thing about this priest, again, is his 1 degree of separation away from Mare. So this priest works with her cousin, who's, I guess, the head priest, and that's really disturbing. So they're having a conversation, and apparently, according to the cell records, Erin's last call was to this priest, and he was saying that he met her, you know, in the youth group, and he made himself available, and she would call him, and, you know, he was just there for support. And at first you're like, okay, that's innocent enough. He seems transparent. He gave up the phone. Like, he didn't seem to be hiding too much. I mean, he did seem nervous, but they kind of sprinkle information about him throughout. And the show has an interesting way of just sprinkling really important information. And you're like, okay. But it seems like this priest had been moved from one parish to another. And it's interesting thinking about that because this seems like kind of a dead-end town where it's like Alaska. Like you're here to either hide out or either you grew up here or you're running away from something. And so it seems like a end of the line. Like if they moved you here, they were really trying to hide you. And so maybe a lot of his nerves are, because he gets kind of sneaky, and you wonder if it's his own self-preservation, like he's worried that they're going to find out why he was moved. So whatever he did, you have to assume it's like pretty bad. But for the time being, he was kind of the monster of the week. And then randomly we get to this other suspect, which is, this old lady neighbor. So if you remember in the first episode, one of the first scenes was Mare being called down and this old lady needed help and she kind of was trying to help her. One of the things Mare does is that she's kind of like a therapist in the community. She just kind of goes door to door and helps people out. Anyways, one of these old ladies that she helped kind of has an issue with her neighbor or like the son of the neighbor. And apparently he just seems like a sociopath or a killer or just somebody that's not really in his right mind. Again, how that's to play out, I don't know. But as we're kind of getting all these suspects and you're kind of watching all this play out, you're like, what? Like, okay, and you're focusing really hard on clues and things like this, and then it becomes clear, like maybe the reason we're unfocused is because Mare is unfocused, and I like that parallel between the two. And the reason she's unfocused, again, is set up right away is because of her grandson. And it seems like the mother of her grandson, like, now wants the child back. And a few things to note about this mother is that she has a history of drug abuse. And throughout this episode, there's these questions of like paternity, like who's the father, who did it. And I'm wondering, like, maybe this baby isn't really her son's baby. You know what I mean? Like that could also be another possibility weighing on her mind, because the whole thing just seems so, like, she seems so protective. And the other thing is Mare just refuses to hear anyone out, because at one point her mother is saying, okay, hey, like, we need to start preparing the child to leave. Like, he's going to go to his mother. And she doesn't even want to hear the possibility. Like, she's like, no, he's going to stay here. I don't want to hear it. And she starts swearing at her and like one generation to the next, but she just doesn't want to hear it. And she gets very angry, actually, if you noticed, if somebody tells her something kind of contradictory. And the other kind of moment where you can kind of see her desperation kicking in is with Guy Pearce's character. And I don't know what his purpose is. You know what I mean? Like, he comes in and out, but I think this episode he served the purpose. Because, again, he's like the writer who's in town at this dead-end university. We don't really know why. We learn more about him. He had a shitty life. And he's a writer. He has a child that he doesn't seem to be really taking care of because he's not a very good father. And we learn more about Mare. So it seems like her dad was a police officer, which is why she became a police officer. And she kind of just did what was expected. And that was her logic towards it. She's like, I just did what I had to do. And in this conversation, her grandson kind of gets brought up, and she kind of shares with Guy Pearce, like, hey, like, my son committed suicide. He has a child. And the one thing that Guy Pearce told her, that her mother told her, was, hey, you need to negotiate. Like, maybe you need to go up to this woman and say, okay, we'll accept you can have the child, but maybe you'll let us be a part of it. Like, kind of meet her in the middle. And Mare's listening like, yeah, you're right. Like, maybe I should. And she totally ignores that advice. And for me, like, I was just like, what is she doing? And so there's two really important things that happen towards the end of this episode. One is Mare's conversation with her dead son's, the father or the mother of her grandson. And they're having a conversation, and the mom is saying, you know what, I've cleaned myself up. Like, I rented out an apartment. Like, she seems to be doing very well for herself. And then Mare goes, you know what, if you try to take this kid away, I'm going to call you an unfit parent. I'm going to do this and that. Like, she doesn't even try to meet her in the middle. She doesn't take any advice. And so you have to assume, like, this desperation is kicking in, and she really holds some type of importance to this child. And she really attacks her, and she's really confident. Again, Mare is like big boss here. So you're like, why is she so confident? And the mom looks clean. And towards the end of the episode, you realize why Mare is so confident. So halfway through the episode, there's like a snippet of her going into like an evidence locker and taking something out. And we don't really know what she's taking out. And then towards the episode, we realized what she had been taking out. So it seemed like she had stolen some evidence or some drugs from an evidence locker and then planted it on the mother of her grandson in order to keep custody. And that to me was just mind-blowing, because I'm like, are you out of your mind? Like, and even her boss came up to her. She's just like, what is you doing? Like, why would you do this? And she doesn't see it, right? Like, she got there's so many moments in this episode where they were telling her, stop. And she got really angry when told otherwise. And so the second moment before we go back to this is the deacon or the priest. And so we see him kind of dumping the missing bicycle into the river. Again, we don't know if he's covering for someone. We don't know if he's trying to kind of take the trail off of him. There could be a lot of other motivations, but it seems like this murder mystery is all over the place. But now what's really interesting is what will happen now that Mare cannot work. You know what I mean? Because that's how she deals with grief, I think. I think she's been overworked, and now she can't really participate in this case. She can't really do anything. So all these kind of feelings that have been kind of below the surface are about to explode. And I wonder what will happen once her grandson's taken away, and once, you know, she's kind of like a pressure cooker that's about to like explode. So I think, again, the show is more about her. And because this whole episode, like, we spent a lot of time with Siobhan, you know, getting to know her. Like, they spend a lot of time on the secondary characters, you know, with Frank and his wife. Like, you get snippets into everybody, and the murder mystery is just something that's there. You know, you're like, and I got kind of frustrated in this episode because I'm like, can we just go back to that? And then I realized, I'm like, oh. So it's going to be interesting to see how the plot changes and, you know, how the main storyline will shift. And so I thought this was a very interesting episode. I think we've been conditioned to kind of focus on the murder mystery and the whodunit and like trying to figure that out. But it doesn't seem like this is the focus here. And so if they can kind of pull it off, I think like it's very ambitious. It could be like quite brilliant, actually. So I don't know, like this was an interesting episode. I think it was like a turning point episode now that she can't work. And until next time. So you guys let me know what you think, and I will catch you all later.